Let me continue a bit on the significance of the jihad movement, but more especially the importance of Islam in helping to shape the Atlantic world and the nature of societies in the Americas as well as Africa. And I want to do this in the following way. I want to talk about uh, some of the Muslims that we know did end up going to the Americas, even though, as I've already indicated, this was illegal, not considered to be acceptable for religious reasons, and hence limited the number of people that went from Muslim areas of West Africa to the Americas. But let's look at some of individuals who actually were Muslims who went there. And the first that I want to show you is Ayuba Suleiman Jallo, who came from Fuda Bondu, which was the first of the jihad states. He ended up in Maryland in the 1730s, and he is the first and earliest of Africans who were enslaved and taken to the Americas, who we know about, who actually went back to Africa. Ayuba Suleiman Jallo, that was a name that North Americans and people in Virginia couldn't pronounce very well, so they called Ayuba Job. And so his Anglophone name was Job, son of Suleiman. And Ayuba dictated and wrote his autobiography, and so that we know a lot about him. His father was was a ruler of Fuda Bondu. He was enslaved, kidnapped when he was on a trading mission. He himself had traded in slaves. You see, as a Muslim, the turban around his head, the type of clothing, and that leather pouch around his neck, which I said has a Quranic verse inside of it, and is worn as an amulet. And I showed this one before, Muslims that were in uh, the northern part of Ashanti, and you see the similar type of clothing. This is from about 1820, a century later than Ayuba, but you see that the clothing and the appearance is relatively similar. Here is another from early 19th century, which shows the same type of clothing, indigo dyed cloth. All these textiles are locally produced textiles in West Africa, so that you get an image of what Muslims look like, and therefore an appreciation that you can take these clothes off these people, but they still have an attitude towards themselves, the body, their community of being Muslims, that is going to influence how they respond and react in the Americas. Uh, Another man, Umar ibn Said from the southern United States, again, who wrote his autobiography. And the fact that all of these individuals I showed you were literate in Arabic, and therefore, in some cases, we even have examples of Muslims who became accountants on plantations in the Americas as specialists. Because even though they were writing in Arabic, they could still keep accounts because they had learned it in school and they knew how to do it. Um, Another man, Ibrahima Abdul Rahman, who was from Fujijalon and enslaved, but even when he's not wearing Muslim clothing, as he isn't here, you can see, anyway, to me, there's a stereotype here, he looks Muslim. He looks that same type of physique, the same type of in his case, he's let his hair grow long, while most Muslim men shave their heads, but no matter. Um, and here another man, Yaro Mahmoud or Muhammad, again, not dressed specifically in Muslim clothing because he's in the Americas, but having a specific look about him from 1819 that, in a sense, shows that There were Muslims present in the United States going back to the beginning of European settlement in North America. There were always Muslims among the African population. And here, another map, which I should have had in the first PowerPoint because it shows where Fouta Djallon is, Fouta Toro, Fouta Bandou, and that whole region of Karta and Ségou, and the upper regions of the Niger River was the area that was all overthrown and incorporated into the state that Al-Hajj Umar founded after 1837, again justifying everything on the basis of Islam. And once again, you see that Ashanti is there as a non-Muslim state, but a non-Muslim state that had a significant Muslim population in the northern part of the country. Nonetheless, it was some of the pictures are demonstrated. And here showing the Sokoto Caliphate again, also Ashanti, just to show you how the jihad movement spread and where this type of image of Islam prevailed. Here is another picture of Muhammad Gardo. Here's a picture of Muhammad Gardo Bakwawa, which next week we'll examine in much greater detail. But again, even in Islam, even in the Americas, this being drawn in the United States, looking as if he's wearing Muslim clothing, although in reality, if he was really wearing Muslim clothing, both of his shoulders would be covered, not just one. And another extremely interesting man, a Muslim, Muhammad Ali Saeed. Here he's dressed in a uniform from the American Civil War because he enlisted in the all-black 56th Regiment of Massachusetts. And his story extremely interesting because he did not cross the Atlantic as a slave. He crossed the Sahara as a slave, and through very curious and unbelievable twists and turns in his life, ended up in Russia and then ended up arriving in the Americas as a free man and consciously enlisting in the Union Army to fight slavery, even though he was not a slave in the United States. Here a picture of Timbuktu in the 19th century with the famous Sankore Mosque in the background. The Sankore Mosque, which was in effect and still is a university. Here the unbelievably beautiful Mosque of Timbuktu, again mud brick. You can see from the size of the doors how tall this building is, how big it is, how grand it is. Because it's made out of mud brick, you see the timber that sticks out that actually supports the next layer of mud brick above it. And to bring this home to Canada, here's the last will and testament of a man by the name of Richard Pierpoint. We don't know what his Muslim name was, but he came from Fouta Bandou, the same as Ayuba did. He was a slave in Pennsylvania at the time of the outbreak of the American War of Independence. He ran away, joined British forces, fought with Butler's Rangers for the British near Niagara Falls in upstate New York. And at the end of when the United States became independent, he retreated with British forces and initially lived in St. Catharines. Was given a grant of land in St. Catharines, and then later fought in the War of 1812. In fact, he led an all-black regiment at the Battle of Queenston Heights when the United States invaded Canada. And I won't say that Richard Pierpoint and his all-black regiment were crucial in the victory of British Canadian forces against the United States. Let's just put it this way. He was on the winning side, and he fought in the war, and it's a feature of Canadian history that most people don't know, that one, that there were Africans that were involved in the generation and the formation of Canada, and that not only that, but some of them, like Richard Pierpoint, were actually Muslims. And here the text that was written by Muhammad Kabasa Ganugu in Jamaica, who came from Futa Jalon, one of the jihad states, and a book that he wrote about praying, when you pray, why you pray, what you pray, what happens if you don't pray, that he wrote in about 1819 or so. He arrived in Jamaica in 1777, so this was like 40 years after he had never been near anything Arabic for 40 years, so this is all written from memory. This showing where in Jamaica he lived. He lived on a coffee estate called Spice Grove, which is located here in what's now Manchester Parish, near the town, the village of Fairfield, which is where the Moravian Mission is located, and there's a school and church there. So just to give you an idea of what happened to Muslims, and what I would argue, and why I entitled this section the spiritual resistance, is because these Muslims had and I'm not suggesting in any way at all that other enslaved people didn't have resistance and so on, but what I am suggesting is that Islam provided a particular form of that resistance, and it was the identification with a religion that was very dominant in parts of West Africa that remained extremely important to individuals' identity and sense of self, even under the harsh conditions of slavery. So what we're looking at in the reading is yet another manifestation of this relationship and importance of Islam, and we're doing that by looking at the personal story of Ali Asimi, who was enslaved in the jihad and sold southward, and ultimately ended up on a slave ship because of the fear that he would join the jihad movement, and therefore he was sold to get rid of him and get him out of the way. But lucky for him, he was on a ship that was intercepted by the British Navy, and he was settled in Sierra Leone, where he adopted another name on the basis of British colonialism, and the name William Harding, and lived the rest of his life in Sierra Leone.